Welcome back to the Legacy Virtual Users Group. Every day is Tuesday's Tip Day, a series of tips to learn more about and play with legacy features, both well-known and some little-known ones. I'm Tessa Keogh, and I'm so glad you could join me today. The longer we work on our family history, the more people we add and the more connections we make. Today, we're going to focus on the most important person in our family tree. As Sir Lancelot sang in the musical Camelot, "C'est moi, c'est moi, 'tis I." Today, we are focusing on interviews, and I want to start off by reminding you to interview yourself. We spend so much time documenting the lives of our ancestors and making sure we include all the facts and events for parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and all those associated and extended family members. But have any of us done the same thing for the person at the keyboard? If not, why not? You're important to your family history story. And if you have, congratulations, well done. Let's see how much sleuthing you've done about you. What information have you included? Hopefully, your vital statistics, as well as information about your parents, siblings, spouse or partner, and your children, as well as any combination of family that so many of us have today, whether that's half-siblings or stepchildren, whatever makes up your family unit. And for yourself, what about education, occupation, travel, hobbies, sports, residence, marriage, memberships, and organizations? What about religious events? Baptism, First Communion, and Confirmation are big in our family. Marriage events, whether that's the engagement, the marriage announcement, certificate, perhaps even a divorce. Military events, registration, service, and discharge papers. Property events, passports, voter registration, and whether you were a witness or a sponsor to someone else's important events. So, have you told your story and included it in your legacy database? If not, take a little time to document your life and give those who come after you some breadcrumbs to follow when you're considered one of the ancestors. Now, how do you recall those early days? One way is to think of the census. It's basically a snapshot of a person and their family unit at a particular date and time. So why not include your census information? For every decade that you've been alive, fill out a census. For those of you who are on the 1930 or the 1940 census, you should be able to transcribe an image from Ancestry or Family Search. For those of you who made your first appearance between 1941 and 1950, you can start with the 1950 census. Some of the rest of us will be joining you later on, perhaps in the 1960, the 1970, the 1980, the 1990, the 2000, or the 2010 census. So where were you on the 1950 to 2010 censuses? Why not help future family historians find you? Take a look at the census overview. That can be found at www.census.gov/history/through-the-decades. There's a summary of every census from 1790 to 2010, including the questions that are asked. So where were you on the 1950 to 2010 censuses? Why not help future family historians find you? Be sure to include whoever was at the house at the time of the census, and while you're filling out those forms, be sure to be honest about your age, and watch that penmanship. Oh, that's right, you're using the keyboard. Well, in any event, be sure to get the number of the dwelling correct and spell the street correctly. Extra points if you can recall your neighbors and provide a bit of information about them. And don't stop there. Are your parents around? If so, get them on the phone or in a Google Plus Hangout, especially if they live far away. Or if you live close by, make the time to sit down with them, perhaps over tea, and interview them. Now, don't make a big production of it, but have some photographs of family members, copies of censuses that they appear on, or perhaps their parents or their aunts and uncles. Ask about their school days, sports, clubs they were involved in, where they were on important dates in history, and what their recollection of those events is. Why not ask them to tell you the 5 most important things they want included in their obituary? Their responses might surprise you. Now, please don't think that I'm morbid, but I do think Americans are a bit uncomfortable talking about death and dying. My advice? Get over it. None of us are getting out of here alive. One of my sisters took a class on death and dying for her social work program. Class assignments included writing their obituary, planning their funeral, and that included picking the readings, the music, and what items they might want at the service and or the reception, as well as what photos they'd want used for the program. I was helping my sister and her daughters organize her files after a recent move of residence, and I happened across her class file. One of her daughters mentioned that she'd have to make sure she kept up playing the violin since she was scheduled to perform at her mom's funeral. Give some thought about those 5 important points for your obituary, both for yourself and for your close family members. I've had a few of these types of interviews with my parents over the past year. We've discussed their childhood, their parents and grandparents, and what they want for their funerals. We've done these interviews both over the phone and in person. Now, I record the conversations, and I have just a couple of suggestions. First, be willing to ask the question, and then be quiet and listen to their answer. Don't be thinking about your next question, because this isn't 60 minutes. Be willing to follow their digressions and meanders. Second, have a method to record your conversation, and hopefully it's unobtrusive. Don't overthink this. Most people are a bit uncomfortable with a recorder or a video camera, so plan to use a recording pen. I use a LiveScribe pen. Or use an app on your phone, something that normally sits on the table and it won't put them off. Third, don't grill your interviewees. You'll know how long is comfortable once you get started, but make sure to keep these interviews in short bursts of no more than about 30 minutes. You can always follow up with them later, and I'm sure they'll appreciate the visits. Now, perhaps your parents are not living. Then be sure to think laterally. Are there any aunts or uncles or perhaps cousins that you can interview? When I spoke with one of my father's cousins recently, and I just screwed up my courage, called her on the phone, and suggested that we have lunch at her retirement home. We not only had a delightful luncheon conversation, but she shared photographs of her family that I had never seen before, and her mother was my great aunt. She was also able to give me the names and contact information for cousins in my generation and below, and she had memories of my grandparents to share. Now, my father's mother died before my parents were married, and her memories of my grandmother are completely different from my father's memories. So it's an opportunity to learn a bit more about your grandparents. Now, if you're unable to go up the tree, parents or grandparents, and you either can't go laterally or you've already picked that fruit, then it's time to look down and find out more about the younger members in your family tree. Have you thought about interviewing your children, your nieces or nephews, or your grandchildren? My niece and I sat down one day and filled in the events and facts that she considers most important in her life. We added her birth, baptism, daycare, first communion, grade school education with favorite classes and why they were her favorite classes, sports teams, favorite music, books, and movies, and the best vacations she's taken with her family. I made copies of her school and special event pictures, and then I had her fill in the 2010 census for me, and I recorded her telling me about her best day ever, so far at least. So what are you waiting for? Schedule some time to spend with yourself and get that toughest interview down. Be sure to revisit every so often and include photos and everyday events and facts in your legacy database, and make the time to visit face-to-face with family members. Be sure to look up, down, and side to side while you're sitting on that branch in your family tree. Have fun and interview those living family members before it's too late. And if you're stuck for questions or just need some inspiration, your first stop should be the interview questions feature in your legacy software. Clicking on Reports and then Other Reports brings up a number of reports and charts. Right now, we're going to select the 8th choice, Interview Questions, which brings up Interview Report. As you can see, the tabs across the top include Interview Questions, Cover Page, and Permission. Let's take a look at each in turn. First off, we have boxes to the right of each of these topics. Clicking on any of those boxes will open the topic. We'll get to this screen in more detail in just a bit. The cover page can include as much or as little as you choose, but definitely fill in the contact information, including the name, date, address, email, and telephone number of the interviewee. And the permission view is really important. Make sure you ask and receive permission to record and/or write up your interview, as well as any permissions you might need to share and publish the information, whether that's in a book, in your software program, or in an online format. So back to our interview questions. Let's click on the topic, Life in Your Town. As you can see, when you've highlighted a topic, you have several choices, and they're all listed in the bottom of the screen, and they include Edit Interview Type, Add Interview Type, Delete Interview Type, Expand or Collapse the Group, and Clear All checkboxes. I've expanded the topic by clicking on the plus sign box, which now is shown as a minus, and I've opened 2 of the subtopics with checkboxes in a little history about you and activities. When I click on the Edit Question, I can change the wording of the question and/or provide some ideas or suggestions to help the person answer the question. And if you're putting this together for an interview report that you're going to use in an in-person interview, these could be your notes to help prompt you with follow-up questions. You can also choose the number of blank lines you want to include in the written answers. In our family, if we were asking about siblings or children, we'd have lots of blank lines because that would come in handy. In this instance, I've included additional holidays from the default in Legacy and put them in a calendar order. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day, Easter, and Thanksgiving. These holidays weren't included in the original question. And I added to the ideas section, where did you go to celebrate? Perhaps a grandparent's home or a holiday home. And because our celebrations tend to center on food, I included a question about the types of food that was served. Once you've made the changes to the question or your ideas, you need to save them. Now you can see that the question has been modified in the interview report. I did the same thing for elementary school. Play around with the various topics and questions. Some topics might not apply to your family. Just don't include them. Simply don't put the check mark in the box. You might want to add some topics. Just check Add a Topic and add whatever questions are pertinent. This is a great way to have a wide range of questions that you can play with as you work through preparing for interviews with family members. And it's really helpful if you're interviewing a family member at a distance, as you can always make a PDF file of your questions and email the interview report to them. And Legacy has the standard questions in some other languages. Keep in mind that you'll probably receive your answers in that language as well, if that's how you send it. And without making any changes to the formatting, this is what a section of the interview report looks like. It's great for your notes if you do a face-to-face interview, and there's plenty of room for someone to write their answers. One suggestion, perhaps work with a topic at a time. You don't want to overload your interviewee with several pages of questions. This is also a great idea for family reunions, whether you use the form in Legacy or you use the form as a jumping-off point for your own form. Play around with the interview feature and gather that information to grow your family tree beyond just the facts. And be a star in your Legacy database. No matter how busy you get with your research, always remember to tell your story. Thanks for joining us each day during the month of October as we celebrate Family History Month by using the letters of the alphabet to learn more about our Legacy software and features. See you back here tomorrow for the letter J.